All right, good afternoon, everybody. I know we're deep into the food coma time of day, so I'll certainly try to keep this lively. But I'm Mitch Stoltz. I'm a senior staff attorney at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. A number of you were here for Cooper's session in the last hour, so I won't go totally repeat his wonderful introduction to EFF, but very briefly, we are a nonprofit, donor-supported civil liberties organization based in San Francisco. We defend individual rights in the use of digital technology. We focus particularly on privacy, on free speech, and on promoting innovation and individual rights. And we are supported largely by donations from individuals, and all of our legal work, our software development, and our activism are all funded by that, and then our legal work is pro bono, is free in that sense. EFS Coders Rights Project, which is a part of our legal operation, is where we work to protect the rights of coders, security researchers, and developers building a safer internet. So we do advise people from time to time. We help people find lawyers when they need it, and we pursue impact litigation. So trying to set precedent that will protect people working in the field and hopefully protect them against threats. Being a lawyer, I have to give you the disclaimer here, I am not your lawyer. This talk will not give you legal advice. Everyone's circumstances are different, and the circumstances that you have, are going to call for, for either specific and careful consideration. And so if you have an issue that you're concerned about and you think you need to talk to a lawyer, then you do. We can help. We have a referral service, so we try to help connect people with lawyers who specialize in this work, and in many cases who can even represent people for reduced fee or no fee where possible. We try to do that, and the best way to get started on that process is to email info@eff.org. So I want to tell you some, kind of give you the lay of the land about the legal pitfalls and what to think about when you're doing a reverse engineering project or using the fruits of reverse engineering to build new things. But this is not legal advice, and so shouldn't expect it to be specific to your issues. That's something different. So what are we talking about here? I'm talking about taking things apart to find out how they work, whether that's hardware or software, jailbreaking devices, getting root on devices, devices that you didn't build, third device that somebody else built, reprogramming things, and then I think the big one is taking that all a step further is writing software that's compatible with things that already exist out there in the world. So writing to an interface, maybe not necessarily an open interface, but building something new that interacts with something that already exists. And there's all kind of examples with this. I'm sure many of you can are either doing this or are familiar with these kind of things. So where are we going to take this? These are in general the things that you're going to want to look out for, and I'm going to go through these in a bit more detail. And that's, on the thing that you're reverse engineering, whether it's hardware or software, do you own it or do you have permission to reverse engineer it? Question of fair use, question of copyright. That is, can you legally copy even sort of temporary or immediate copies? Then sort of the contract issue, the fine print, the terms of service, the little dense, impenetrable legal text that you click through or that is stuck in the box with the product, or any of those things that we all get, flashed in front of our eyeballs on a daily basis, and we usually ignore out of self-preservation. And finally, something called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. This is a law against circumventing. Essentially, we're talking about DRM here. We're talking about access controls on software or media. That's in a sense, probably the biggest concern here. So I'm going to save that for last and talk about how to navigate it, but also what we need to do to fix it. So first issue here, and this is kind of the simplest one, is if you're reverse engineering something, the first question to ask is, do I own this thing, or do I have permission to tinker with it? And the main issue here is something called the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. How many people here remember a movie from the early 1980s called War Games, starring Matthew Broderick? Oh, a lot of folks. Okay. In 1986, after having seen or heard about this movie, it freaked out a bunch of members of Congress who were suddenly worried about teenagers launching World War III from their bedroom. They passed this thing. Their solution to that, because this is sort of what lawmakers do when they get panicked, is they pass a law, and not always the best written law. So the result was the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, which is still with us. It has a few parts, and it's sort of all an attempt to define and capture malicious hacking. And there's a few different parts, but the relevant ones are here. It's whoever intentionally accesses a computer without authorization or exceeds authorized access and thereby obtains information from any protected computer. Now, protected computer, kind of a red herring. That's any computer, really. The key to whether something violates CFAA or not is this word's without authorization or exceeds authorized access. And then one of the other subparts of this is the first one was obtaining information, but also the transmission of a program, information, code, or command that intentionally causes damage without authorization. So we're either exfiltrating information or we're causing damage. These get interpreted pretty creatively when someone has a bone to pick, and then that's what because we can probably all think of ways in which we've all violated these, from time to time by some definition, and then that's a problem. These laws are broad, they're vague, and in this case, they're sometimes can be criminal. This is either criminal or civil. So this can lead to a lawsuit from a private company, or the feds bringing criminal charges, and this has happened, and it's But when we're talking about reverse engineering, I mean, there's really just two main concerns here. If you own the thing, the risk is lower here. It's not gone, but it's lower. If you own the hardware, it's really a stretch to say that you are you can make unauthorized access to something that you own. Now, this has been tried. This has come up in court cases that no court has really said this. I mean, it sort of gets thrown in the mix there. There was a guy named George Hotz, also known as GeoHot, who figured out how to hack the PlayStation 3 to run Linux on it after Sony. It wasn't just GeoHot. He was part of a group of folks doing this, but after Sony withdrew the ability to run Linux and other operating systems on the PlayStation 3, they figured out how to crack that security. They were sued. The court ordered them to stop doing that and to stop disseminating even the knowledge of how to do that, which was a bad result. But one of the things that got thrown into that suit by Sony was, well, you've exceeded authorized access. The court didn't actually use that, and I think it's pretty far-fetched. But then the other thing to be the other area of concern, assuming that you own it or you're tinkering with a hardware or software with the permission of the owner, is it connecting to a network? Because even if you are making authorized access to, say, the smartphone in your pocket, it may be communicating with another computer that is owned by, in the case of my phone here, Samsung or Verizon or Google or someone else, and maybe that's unauthorized access. this is going to come up in one other context, so we'll put a pin in this and come back to it. But takeaway is the first question is here is, do you own the thing, and is it communicating with a network for the purposes that you want to use it for? The next thing is copyright. And the reason copyright always comes up in this context is because it's ubiquitous. Any creative material, including code, is automatically copyrighted from the moment it gets set down, or with the moment it's on paper or on a hard drive. The moment it's out of your head and into physical reality, copyright applies. You don't have to register it. You don't have to be granted a copyright and have a certificate and framed on your wall. It's automatic, and that means that whenever code is copied, copyright comes into the picture. Doesn't always prevent you from doing that, but it's always something you have to consider. And fair use is the broad exception to copyright, where copying is allowed in circumstances where it should be allowed, and it's vague in a sense. I mean, there's a test for whether something is fair use or not. In a sense, it's a bit of the golden rule. Copy only what you would wish to be copied of yours. That is a gross and probably misleading definition, but I think it's a good starting place. There are some specifics when it comes to software, and this is what to keep in mind. So I take you back, if you will allow me, to 1992. Sega Genesis, one of the most popular consoles of that era, and a game publisher called Accolade, which didn't ask Sega's permission to write games for the Genesis system. They simply reverse engineered the console to figure out the API for those big plastic ROM cartridges in order to write their own. Genesis sued. They said, "Well, you disassembled our console. You made copies of you dumped the ROM. You made copies of the code. You used them internally, and then you wrote your own games based on that." Court said, "Okay, that's fine. That's fair use. That's not copyright infringement, because first of all, because the copies were intermediate. The Accolade games, the game cartridges that they were creating, they didn't have any Sega code in them. They were just written to the API of the console. The copies were made internally and in a sort of intermediate sense just to figure out how to do that. The second thing was necessity. Like, there was no other way to do that. It wasn't an open standard. It was, in a sense, they had to do that in order to write games. And the third thing is that it was they were creating something new. The end goal here was to write new games. They weren't sort of free riding on someone else's work. They were doing what's necessary in order to bring something else new into the world. All those things matter. Then a similar thing happened again, but sort of reversing the sides of the API here, and this was in 2000. Sorry, this one got cut off a little bit, but the premier console, one of the premier consoles in that era, was the PlayStation Kinectix, maker of, for the most part, emulation software, right? Rather than writing new games for the PlayStation, they wrote a PlayStation emulator that could play existing games. Same sort of lawsuit, same result. This was fair use. This was okay. And for similar reasons, the broad principle, and it's a little bit dangerous to generalize from here, but there is a broad principle that emerges with some caveats around the edges. The broad is that disassembling and looking at code and using it in an intermediate sense to create a final product that is something new and that is compatible with the original product is likely to be fair use, likely to be okay under copyright. Now, going all the way up to 2015, similar case here that Oracle brought against Google because Google used large portions of the Java API in Android. Java was Sun, bought by Oracle. Oracle sued Google for copyright infringement for doing. It was really pretty much similar to what Connectix did. So the Android OS was, in a sense, emulating the Java runtime, so that it wasn't perfectly. It wasn't. I don't think binary compatible, but it was source compatible in some sense. Somebody else probably knows this better than I do. But this actually, this case is still going on, and the outcome is a bit uncertain. There was a pretty scary ruling from an appeals court, a different appeals court this time, said that you can copyright an API, and you can, in theory, use copyright to stop someone from writing to your API. Pretty scary thought, and not, I think, the sort of common wisdom amongst programmers. But we got this ruling. The Supreme Court didn't take the case. It still might be fair use, and the court said it's probably likely fair use. So the result from the Sony Connectix case probably still good. Anyway, here's fair use. I won't go too much into this, but this is the test. You'll see it's vague, right? You'll see that it's flexible, which is good and bad, both. I mean, this is very adaptable to new situations, but it's also kind of difficult to predict, like, the outcome of any given thing. It's 4 factors. The important ones really are the first and the fourth. So it's the purpose and character of the use, including whether it's commercial or nonprofit, and then the effect of the use upon the potential market for a value of the copyrighted work, which then again kind of gets to, are you simply free riding or replacing what's already there, or are you complementing it by creating something new? Now, this is how those apply in general, how those factors apply to reverse engineering, and fair use in these cases give us things to keep in mind when we're reverse engineering code. How much copied code is in the final product, if any? In those cases I mentioned, there was almost none, and that's key. In the Sega Genesis case, there was 4 bytes copied, the letters SEGA. In theory, if there's some kind of key, fixed key or something, or API key or something like that that has to get copied, I think that's probably going to be a fair use if you must use that in order to make something run. It wasn't actually. I mean, it was more about the court went into just sort of the layout of method and function calls, and suggested that just sort of the hierarchy of method and function calls could be something that's subject to copyright. They copied header files. They copied C header files, quite a lot of them, but not implementation. Still an open question. Right. So I think these are the takeaways. I think it's did you use any copied code in the final product, the final new product? That you're copying as necessary in order to create something new, not to avoid doing your own work. And then lately, and we're starting to see this more recently in cases, I think this is a bad trend, but it's there, so it's something we have to watch out for, is are you taking security precautions during this process so that say the trade secrets from the original, or really the details that you've learned from the reverse engineering aren't leaking out to people who are just going to make careless use of them. That's a factor that the courts are starting to take into account. That's the copyright piece. The next piece, I call it the fine print. Lawyers would call it contract. It's it's end-user license agreements, terms of service, terms of use. It's all those names for all the ridiculous legal gobbledygook that we see or get exposed to every time we deal with digital products and software these days. There was a study a couple of years ago that said that if we all actually tried to read all of the legal terms that we are exposed to and asked to agree to in a year, it would take us 3 weeks, morning to night. Which means it's basically impossible. And I'll tell you that even lawyers who are sort of have a morbid interest in this stuff and are trained to do it don't read every one of those things. It's just not possible. But when you want to reverse engineer something, it is one of those moments where you actually do have to pay attention to what terms you were presented with, when and how, and whether you clicked the I agree button, or how those were presented to you. And the reason is because they often have terms like this. And I mean, this is from the Samsung Galaxy Note, but this is pretty standard for both hardware and software, right? I'm sure you've all seen this language out of the corner of your eye at some point. It says, you agree that you will not and will not attempt to modify, prepare derivative works of, reverse engineer, decompile, disassemble, or otherwise attempt to create source code from the software. Yikes, I mean, this is all the things we want to do, right? And this is, we see this pretty commonly. This standing alone, you know, it's not a law, it's a contract, at most. You know, it may just be words. So the question is what effect does this have on you in what you want to do? And this is one of those talk to your lawyer moments, because this is going to vary. The important thing is just to note these things. Take a screenshot. Take a download the terms. If it's on paper, save the paper. And note how you got past it, whether it was simply thrown up at you on a website or whether you had to click an I agree button. This is another example, and this is something else that raises another wrinkle. This one's from the Xbox 360, and it's talking more about networking. It says, you can't use unauthorized software or hardware to access the services, nor can you modify an authorized device in any unauthorized way through unauthorized repairs, unauthorized upgrades, or unauthorized downloads. This is the sort of thing they're going to use to say, okay, you can modify, or you have modified your console, you can't connect to our network with it anymore. Which is something which is, always going to add another wrinkle. I'll get back to that. These may not matter that much if what you're doing is sort of gathering information for study or for your own edification. You may be breaking a contract. They don't come to you and demand your phone back. I'm sure you're definitely going to avoid the warranty, right? But assuming you made a contract, that is, assuming you actually agreed to something, which is a question for your lawyer, you may, there's not a whole lot they can do about it unless two things: you're either building a product from this, in which case you want to try to avoid these kind of things, or there's this weird case, to get back to the CFAA, and we've seen this is thankfully the courts are moving away from this. But there have been cases where people have been accused of violating the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, that was war games, because they violated the terms of service, which is crazy in a sense. And the court and overzealous prosecutors continue to bring this up, but the courts are moving away from it. And then there's a judge out in California with a wry sense of humor said, you're talking about violating the terms of service on an online dating site, and he said, if you describe yourself as tall, dark, and handsome when you're actually short and homely, you may earn you a handsome orange jumpsuit. But he rejected that and said, no, that's not what this does. You can't turn violating the fine print on a digital hardware or software into a crime. But that still comes up every once in a while. So it's just something to keep. But we've been mostly successful in moving the law away from that, but it's not totally gone. Sometimes you can avoid these terms by buying secondhand. Not always. It's not a magic talisman. It's something you really have to check in every case. But there are definitely cases where if you buy something used, you didn't click the I agree. And you never actually entered a contract with the original manufacturer or anybody. Now that's right. Now it's not a magic talisman, and it doesn't always work. So if you're doing things for that, you're basically any work that you plan to share with anyone else, it's a good idea to get your ducks in a row and talk to a lawyer before you attempt this. But it's a possibility. And then again, I mentioned it before, but then even if your use of a device or a piece of software is not violating one of those things, if it's connecting to someone else's network or server, then you may be exceeding authorized access to that, and that's raises another wrinkle. So then, finally, the last, assuming you've cleared the 3 hurdles I've mentioned already, the CFAA, the ownership issue, basic copyright and fair use, and the terms in the fine print, we get to this thing, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which may be the biggest obstacle here to reverse engineering, but again, not insurmountable, and not a reason to lose all hope. This was passed in 1998. It says no persons shall circumvent a technological measure that effectively controls access to a work protected by copyright. Well, what the hell does that mean? Well, it says there's a bit more to it. It says what that means is a measure that in the ordinary course of its operation requires the application of information or a process or a treatment with the authority of the copyright owner to gain access to the work. Well, gee, that's not a whole lot more illuminating. We know this means, we know that this covers the encryption. This was written to cover things that are commonly called DRM, digital rights management, digital restrictions management, technical protection measures, access controls on digital media and/or software that are designed to really sort of enforce someone else's business model. And we know this doesn't cover just a label or an HTML tag that says, "Please don't copy this." It has to be something that has some sort of technical process, and not just a label or a legend, even if that label is digital. But still, so what does this mean, right? So the big question with the DMCA is, does it stop us from doing things that would be legal otherwise, or does it only apply when we are circumventing access controls in order to make illegal copies of something, or to help others make illegal copies of something? Courts have gone both ways on this, and that's the tricky part. So this is the early aughts Lexmark. Actually, this case is still going on. It's been going on for like 15 years. The Lexmark printers, Lexmark laser printers, do a handshake with a chip that lives in the toner cartridge, and if they don't receive the right handshake from the chip in the toner cartridge, the printer won't run. Some folks who made recycled, they refurbish toner cartridges, so they refill them, replace the chip, and sell them as refurbished. They wrote their own chip, which emulates that handshake. Lexmark sued them. They said, "You're circumventing an access control." Court said, "No, that's okay." Essentially, they said it's because because the customer already owns both of those things. So there's there's no unauthorized access there. And then there was a similar case with this is a company that made replacement garage door remotes, and the company that makes the garage door opener engine sued them for reverse engineering the RF communication protocol that opens the garage door. They said, well, basically, this has nothing to do with copyright infringement. We're not copying code here. You're just making new remotes. And if there's no connection to copyright infringement, then you're not violating the DMCA either. Now, unfortunately, some courts went the other way. This is kind of similar to the garage door opener, but in a different context. This is World of Warcraft, a famous multiplayer online game, and a program called Glider, which automated gameplay. I think it again, reverse engineered the protocol by which the World of Warcraft client talks to the server and replayed some of those protocol actions to just, I don't know, make your character walk around and gather gold or something like that, do basic actions. In this case, the court said, yeah, even if this isn't really about copyright infringement, that doesn't matter. This is a separate thing. You're breaking an access control, or circumventing, reverse engineering an access control, and that in itself is illegal. Can't do it. So it went totally different way. Courts are split, which is tricky, right? Because then what do you do? If you want to reverse engineer something to build new things, if it's going to involve breaking an access control, there's another way to do this, which is the Library of Congress and the U.S. Copyright Office, which is part of the Library of Congress, every 3 years does this rulemaking proceeding where people can propose things that are going to be exceptions to this law, and where things, and they're tough to get, and we have to ask for them again repeatedly every 3 years. EFF does these. EFF has participated in this in most years. The last rulemaking just finished up this past October. It's tricky, it's expensive, and it tends to end up with pretty narrow exceptions. We've gotten some good ones, and we've got some good ones this time around. This is just a few of them. This is not, jailbreak and rooting mobile devices. This is really defined as modifying the software on a mobile device, and this used to be just phones, but we've got them to include tablets and smartwatches too. So basically, anything running a mobile OS as opposed to a desktop OS. That's how we've sorted it out this time. You can modify it to run software of your choice. And similar thing for carrier unlocking. So you can, assuming you have the codes to do it or configure them or configure them out, you could unlock a mobile device to change wireless carriers without this law getting in the way. And then there's two more gonna take effect this October. One on vehicle diagnosis, repair, and modification, and another one on the good faith security testing of various different kinds of products. When we proposed an exception for vehicle repair, the auto industry was up in arms, and we even heard from John Deere, who wrote to the Copyright Office to complain that this is dangerous because people might pirate music on their tractors. Unfortunately, it actually takes a lot of time and money to knock down these arguments, even when they're silly. But this is where we're at. We're particularly excited about the vehicle repair and security testing exemptions when those come online, because we think those are really help provide protection for a lot of independent repair and for a lot of interesting security work. But this process is not sustainable. There's a bill introduced in Congress. It's called the Unlocking Technology Act of 2015. It'll expire at the end of this year, but we're pretty sure it'll be introduced again when the new Congress comes in next year. And this is what this law will do is it'll basically take us back to the toner cartridges and the garage door openers, and to say if you're circumventing things and you're not doing it to make bootleg DVDs or to steal your competitor's code and sell it, if you're doing it for purposes that are otherwise legal, then it's legal. That's really the fix that we need. You can help us get there. The Copyright Office is asking for comments. The due date is April 1st. If you go to this website, there's instructions on how to do it. You can send just basic text comments, or you can upload a document, and they're accepting comments through April 1st. Just giving your opinion is great. I think the really valuable thing is if you have anecdotes. Remember, this is public record, so probably best not to tell them if you think you've broken the law or doing anything questionable. But if you have personal stories about the importance of security testing, repair, reverse engineering, and how it might be impacted by the DMCA, and you can give anecdotes about that, I think that'll be really powerful for these guys. Of course, we are continuing to pursue this, and again, I'll make a shameless plug here for donations to EFF. We are, many of us, working every day, and it's going to be a major priority this year to try to fix this law, try to remove this cloud of legal uncertainty over security research. I'll leave this up here. This is the points that I mentioned earlier, the things to think about before you start a reverse engineering process. And happy to take questions. Remember, I can't give specific legal advice, but I can certainly try to tell you what experiences others have had, and hopefully clarify some of the things here.
So I'm asking for, is there any prior cases involving what I'm going to ask, digital forensics that might probably will have a reverse engineer file formats, electronics, stuff like that? Is there any court cases or anything involving like doing that type of work for evidentiary purposes and appeal proceeding or anything? I'm curious. I've never seen anything like that.
That's a good question. Sure, I was asking if there are cases about using digital forensics as evidence in a court case.
These parties are not necessarily involved in the lawsuit at hand, but it could be a way to take out the evidence in question. It's like, you can follow the terms and policies to acquire this in the first place.
I don't know if there are any cases that touch on the DMCA. There are cases about fair use that say that basically you can't call copyright infringement because somebody made a copy of something to submit to a court case. So that's a start there. For the most part, it's expert witness information. It has to be reliable. It has to be sort of based on reliable methods. Yeah. I haven't either. Not on the DMCA.
So the question is, I've heard a few things. I'm not sure if my understanding of it is correct. I noticed you didn't talk about the Wassenaar arrangement, and I've heard that some of in the DMCA, you talk about the 3-year exemption for security testing. And I've heard that some of the security tools for the Wassenaar arrangement, in which I guess they're currently reviewing, I guess there was some recent news about it, those were under fire. So if security testing isn't allowed, but that Wassenaar arrangement isn't rewritten, do we not find ourselves in a catch-22 where the tools you use to do these things are now illegal, but you can do them? So I'm curious.
Yes, we do find ourselves in a catch-22. The good news is the U.S. government has basically rejected that piece of the Wassenaar agreement. The uncertain news is we don't know what the rest of the world is going to do.
Gotcha. Okay. Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah.
In terms of the first point where you're saying have permission, do you mean
Yeah, you say what sort of permission is that? Your mileage may vary. The easiest thing, the easy question is going to be if you own the thing. Beyond that, if you are concerned, then you're going to want to talk to a lawyer. Is the best answer I can give. The Trans-Pacific Partnership doesn't make that many changes to U.S. law. Would not require that many changes to U.S. law. It actually is going to affect folks in other countries more. What it could do, and we're fighting very hard against this, is it might make it harder in the U.S. to fix some of these problems. Might politically set these in stone a little more strongly, both here and in the other countries. But it wouldn't cause a lot of immediate changes in the U.S.
I'm going to take advantage of the lawyer in the room if I can.
You can try.
So one of the challenges that I face as an information security engineer is we are moving away from an economy where we purchase our software. We are moving to cloud-based SaaS models for our ERP systems, and even probably the better example being Office 365. I no longer own Office for my organization. I'd be curious as to your comment, what you think is going to happen in a world where the legal terms are being argued for, at least in my mind, please correct me if I'm wrong, for software ownership, like, do you own this thing, when the things I'm buying anymore have specific clauses that I don't own them. I have a lease on them, or I have the ability to use them, but I don't own them. So curious if you have a comment on that.
Yeah, things get much harder. Not only do you not own it, and that's typical, right? This is going back 30 years now. That even when software was sold in little cardboard boxes, there'd be a text in the box that says, "We're not actually selling you anything. We're just giving you a right to use this. We're not selling you anything except the cardboard box. Everything else is at our sufferance." That's not new. What's new is you're not even in possession of the bits, right? You're not in possession of the object code that's running on Microsoft servers or what have you. That absolutely makes these problems harder. Certainly, legalities aside, it makes it harder to audit the code. It makes it harder to audit what it's doing with your information.
Follow up to that.
Yeah.
Have you seen any case law or precedent coming through that have potentially addressed that problem?
I think we're going to start to see it in the context of data breaches and company liability for data breaches, which it's possible, could lead to essentially just, software as a service, or leased software, or that kind of thing, maybe being treated more like other kind of consumer goods, as far as if it injures you or mangles your data, then they're going to bear some responsibility for that. But that's tough, and that's tricky. How much time do we have? Another question? Yeah.
As a quick one, when you talked about the computer abuse fraud act, I got a little bit concerned because the nature of our work is very intrusive, right? Do I have to ask my employer for specific consent to the things I do, or it's a given that my job description, there is a consent is already there because they hire me to do all those things, vulnerability assessments and.
So, your mileage may vary. I don't know what's in your employer agreements, and couldn't tell you about it here if I did. But in general, yes, those things can be understood. They don't necessarily have to be explicit. Yeah. Yeah. One more.
Regarding the 3-year exemption for vehicle modding and repairing and stuff like that, in your opinion, do you see any kind of confusion there with vehicles like Tesla, which are basically a car with like a
start and one end. I feel like that, that's specifically talking about like the EV board or maybe even the chips that actually regulate gas air mixture or something like that. But it kind of gets a little confusing, I guess.
Let me see if I can. If you come up after, I can show you the actual language. It's broad enough to cover that. I mean, and Tesla is the extreme as far as being sort of a rolling iPhone, but all cars, all modern cars, have an enormous amount of software and computing power in them, and the exemption was designed to cover most of that, with the exception of entertainment, like audio-visual stuff. I can show you. Yeah. Thanks. I'll be around.